Ethan was one of the richest men in the country, but he was also the loneliest.
Every woman I've ever met only loves my money. They don't even see me. Then let them meet the real you. Before they know your bank account, let them know your heart. I have an idea. We switch places. You become me, I become my driver.
Sir, this is crazy. What if someone finds out?
One night, one party, one test that would change Ethan's life forever.
Ethan was not born into wealth. Long before people called him one of the richest businessmen in the country, he was just a little boy growing up in a small village where hunger was a familiar visitor at the door, arriving uninvited far more often than it ever left willingly. His father, Mr. Thompson, died when Ethan was still too young to fully understand what death truly meant. One day, his father was there, carrying him on strong shoulders and promising to buy him sweets once business improved. The next day, all that remained were tears, mourners dressed in black, and a fresh grave beneath the mango tree at the edge of the village. From that moment forward, life became a daily struggle for Ethan and his mother, Mrs. Thompson. Every morning, long before the sun climbed above the hills, she would roast fresh corn by the roadside, hoping enough travelers would stop to buy from her small stand. Some days she sold nearly everything and returned home with a light heart and heavier pockets. Other days, she came home with most of the corn unsold, and they would boil water flavored with a little salt to trick their stomachs into feeling full before sleep finally came. There were entire weeks when they survived on a single meal a day. Ethan hated watching his mother pretend she wasn't hungry. She always smiled and said the same words. "I already ate at the market. Don't worry about me." But Ethan knew she was lying, because in the silence of the night, he could hear her stomach growling from across the small room they shared. One sweltering afternoon, while helping his mother arrange her roasted corn along the roadside, Ethan watched several gleaming cars speed past them in a blur of polished metal and privilege. The drivers wore crisp suits, and the passengers laughed as if they had never once known what it felt like to go to bed hungry. Ethan stared after those cars until they vanished into the shimmering heat on the horizon. His mother noticed the longing in his eyes and smiled gently. "What are you thinking about, my son?" Ethan looked at her with a determination that seemed far too heavy for a child his age. "One day, Mama, I'll become one of those rich men. I'll buy you the biggest house in this whole country. You'll never have to roast corn by a dusty roadside again." His mother's smile widened with pride, but she placed a soft, calloused hand on his shoulder. "My son, I pray God blesses you with wealth beyond measure. But never forget this. Money can buy comfort, but it can never buy a sincere heart. Never judge people by what they own, and never let money change the kind of person you are inside." Ethan nodded, though at that age he could not fully grasp the weight of her words. Still, they settled quietly into his heart, waiting patiently for the day he would finally understand. Years passed, and before Ethan could fulfill the grand promise he had made her, sickness crept into their small home and stole his mother away in the middle of a rainy season. She died before she ever saw a single fragment of the success her son would one day achieve. On the day of her burial, Ethan stood beside the fresh grave with tears streaming freely down his young face. He knelt in the wet earth and pressed both palms flat against the mound of soil. "I'm sorry, Mama," he whispered. "I couldn't save you. I couldn't give you the life you deserved. But I promise you this, right here, right now, I will become successful. I will make your name one this country never forgets." That promise became the fire that pushed him forward through every impossible day that followed. Life did not soften after her death. After finishing school with barely enough money to pay the final term's fees, Ethan started a small business with almost nothing but stubborn hope. He rented a tiny office, so cramped it barely fit a desk and a single worn-out chair. Many nights, rather than pay for a room he couldn't afford, he unrolled a thin mattress across the office floor and slept beneath the hum of a broken ceiling fan. Some mornings he woke covered in mosquito bites, washed his face in a small plastic bucket, ironed the same shirt for the third day in a row, and walked out to search for customers with a smile stitched firmly onto his exhausted face. Success refused to come quickly or kindly. Business partners cheated him without hesitation. One man vanished entirely, taking with him nearly every coin Ethan had scraped together over 2 brutal years. Ethan sat alone in his office that evening, staring blankly at the empty balance glowing on his laptop screen, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry. "Why?" he whispered into the empty room. "Why does this keep happening to me?" Nobody answered. He visited bank after bank, hoping desperately for a loan to rebuild what had been stolen. Every single one turned him away. "Your business is too risky. You don't have enough collateral. We're sorry, but your application has been declined." Each rejection felt like another heavy door slamming shut directly in his face. Friends who had once sworn to stand beside him through anything slowly began disappearing, one uncomfortable silence at a time. His phone grew quieter with each passing week. People who once called him daily stopped answering entirely. Some crossed to the other side of the street just to avoid the awkwardness of greeting a man they now believed had failed. But Ethan refused to break. While others slept peacefully, he worked through the night by candlelight. While others celebrated their own small victories, he remained hunched over his desk, planning his next impossible move. He taught himself new skills. He met new people, one careful handshake at a time. Slowly, painstakingly, he began rebuilding everything that had been torn away from him. One small contract became 2. 2 became 10. He launched a second company, then a third. Years of relentless sacrifice finally began bearing fruit. His businesses expanded far beyond the borders of the city. Investors who once ignored his calls now came searching for him instead. Newspapers wrote glowing features about his astonishing journey from poverty to prominence. Business magazines placed his confident, smiling face across their glossy front covers. Before long, Ethan had become one of the richest businessmen in the entire country. He purchased a magnificent mansion overlooking the shimmering city skyline, his garage filled steadily with gleaming luxury cars. He wore watches that cost more than most people's homes and tailored suits cut precisely to his frame. Thousands of employees now worked beneath the umbrella of his companies, and countless young entrepreneurs pointed to his story as living proof that anything was possible. People admired him wherever he walked. But every single evening, once the final meeting ended and the office lights clicked off one by one, Ethan returned to his enormous, echoing mansion, sat alone at a dining table built to seat 12 guests, and quietly ate dinner in complete solitude. The house was breathtaking. It was also unbearably silent. The applause he collected during daylight hours could never fill the hollow ache that settled in once the sun went down. Hoping to finally fill that emptiness, Ethan began dating, believing, perhaps naively, that love would eventually find its way to him the way success had. His first girlfriend adored expensive things above almost everything else. Hardly a week passed without her asking, "Ethan, when are you buying me another car? My friends have all upgraded theirs already." Ethan smiled through it, believing love required sacrifice and patience. But whenever he hesitated even slightly, she grew cold and distant, her affection visibly tied to his spending. That relationship crumbled almost as quickly as it had begun. He met another woman who seemed genuinely kind at first, until she began sending him photographs of designer handbags nearly every single day. "This one would look absolutely beautiful on me," she would text, followed by a laughing emoji that somehow never quite reached her eyes in person. Soon, every conversation between them revolved entirely around shopping lists. That relationship ended too. A third woman constantly whispered that she loved him, filling his ears with sweet promises. But Ethan later discovered, through a painful accident of overheard conversation, that she was secretly seeing another billionaire simultaneously, quietly comparing the two men based on which one spent more freely. The betrayal cut deeper than he expected, leaving a bruise that lingered long after the relationship ended. Then came a woman who appeared, on the surface, absolutely perfect. She loved taking photographs with him at extravagant restaurants, posting them online with captions dripping in performative happiness. One afternoon, curious and cautious, Ethan decided to quietly test her. He mentioned, gently, that he wanted to reduce unnecessary spending for a while in order to reinvest in expanding one of his companies. Her bright smile disappeared almost instantly, replaced by a flicker of something colder. Within weeks, she ended things without so much as a backward glance. After years of accumulating disappointment, Ethan noticed something that quietly broke his heart piece by piece. Not one of these women had ever asked about his dreams. None wondered what kept him awake, staring at his ceiling at 3 in the morning. None asked whether he was happy or lonely or simply tired. Every conversation, without exception, eventually circled back to the same unspoken question. What are you buying for me next? Sitting alone one evening inside his enormous, echoing mansion, Ethan let out a long, weary sigh. Is this all I'll ever be to people? He asked the empty room. Just a wallet with a face attached? The loneliness had grown heavier than every fortune he had ever accumulated. Through all of it, there remained only one person who had never once changed toward him. His driver, James. James had worked alongside Ethan for years, but their relationship had long since outgrown the simple boundaries of employer and employee. They shared meals during quiet afternoons. They joked easily during long, winding drives across the city. Sometimes, in the cool of the evening, they sat together outside the mansion discussing football, family, and the strange, unpredictable shape of life itself. Ethan had quietly paid the school fees for James's younger brother and sister without ever expecting a single word of gratitude in return. Whenever James's mother called, she always ended the conversation with the same heartfelt prayer. God will continue to bless you, my son. May he send people into your life who love you with a sincere and honest heart. James respected Ethan deeply, but he never once treated him like a walking bank account waiting to be emptied. He never demanded gifts. He never quietly exploited Ethan's generosity for his own gain. One quiet evening, after a long day's work finally wound down, Ethan and James sat together outside the mansion, watching the sun bleed orange and gold across the horizon. After a long, comfortable silence, Ethan finally spoke. James, yes, sir. Do you think anyone will ever love me for me? James remained quiet for a long moment before answering carefully. Why would you ask something like that? Ethan offered a sad, tired smile. Because every woman I've ever met only seems interested in what I can buy for her. Sometimes I honestly wonder, if I wasn't rich, would anyone even notice I existed? James nodded slowly, understanding settling across his features. I understand exactly how you feel, sir. Ethan sighed deeply, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. I'm tired, James. I'm genuinely, completely tired. James studied him thoughtfully before speaking again. Can I be honest with you about something? Please, go ahead. Maybe the problem was never really your money. Ethan frowned slightly, confused. Then what is it? James offered a gentle, knowing smile. Maybe nobody has ever actually met the real Ethan. Before they get the chance to know your heart, they already know your bank account balance. Ethan stared at him without a single word escaping his lips. James continued, his voice soft but sure. How could someone possibly love the real you, sir, when they've never once been given the chance to actually meet him? Ethan sat in complete, stunned silence. Those words echoed relentlessly through his mind, over and over, refusing to quiet down. For the first time in years, he felt as though someone had finally, gently, pointed directly at the true source of his pain. That simple, honest conversation planted a small but stubborn idea deep inside Ethan's chest, an idea that would soon reshape the entire course of his life. James's words lingered in Ethan's mind for days afterward. No matter how packed his schedule became with meetings and negotiations, he could not shake the thought loose. Maybe nobody has ever met the real Ethan. The longer he sat with it, the more undeniably true it felt. Every single woman he had ever dated already knew he was wealthy long before she knew his favorite meal, his deepest fears, or the painful, hungry childhood that had shaped every fiber of who he'd become. One evening after work, Ethan called James into his private study. James walked in carrying his usual notebook, expecting nothing more unusual than another scheduling update. Instead, he found Ethan sitting quietly on the couch, wearing a strange, mischievous smile. James, I need your help with something. James smiled easily. You know, I'll always help however I can, sir. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I want us to switch places. James blinked. Switch places? Yes, just for one evening. James looked genuinely confused. Sir, I don't think I understand. Ethan laughed softly. You become me, and I become my own driver. James stared at him for a long beat before bursting into laughter. You cannot possibly be serious right now. I've never been more serious in my life. James's laughter died the moment he realized Ethan truly wasn't joking. No, sir, absolutely not. This is madness. Ethan raised a curious eyebrow. Why not? James shook his head firmly. What if someone recognizes the truth? What if I say something completely wrong? What if someone corners me about a business deal I know nothing about? Sir, this is genuinely a terrible idea. Ethan chuckled, unbothered. Relax. It's only for one party. James crossed his arms tightly. One party is more than enough time to destroy everything you've built. Ethan stood and walked closer, his expression turning more earnest. Chris is hosting a house party this weekend. You know Chris, my oldest, closest friend. I've already spoken to him about the plan, and he's agreed to help us. James stared at him in complete disbelief. Even Mr. Chris agreed to something this reckless? Ethan nodded, grinning now. He actually laughed for nearly 5 straight minutes before he finally agreed. James rubbed the back of his neck anxiously. Sir, I honestly don't think I can pull this off. Ethan placed a firm, reassuring hand on his shoulder. James, I trust you completely. You don't need to be perfect. Just smile, greet people warmly, and let me quietly watch how they treat us both once they believe you're the billionaire in the room. James let out a long, helpless sigh, a reluctant smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. One day, sir, your ideas are going to land me directly in the hospital. Ethan laughed loudly. Then I promise I'll personally cover every medical bill. James couldn't help laughing along with him. Fine, just this one party. Just one party, Ethan repeated, grinning like a man who had already won something important. The following afternoon, the sprawling mansion transformed into the stage for one of the funniest, most chaotic hours either man had ever shared. James stood inside Ethan's enormous dressing room, staring uncertainly at row upon row of gleaming designer suits. He carefully selected one and struggled into it for several increasingly frustrated minutes before finally calling out, Sir, I think this jacket is actively fighting me. Ethan walked in and immediately burst into laughter. James had somehow, impossibly, managed to put the suit jacket on completely inside out. James, Ethan wheezed between laughs, nearly collapsing onto the bed. How did you even manage this? James looked down at himself and started laughing too, unable to help it. I've worn uniforms my entire working life. These rich people's clothes have far too many buttons and far too many confusing places. Ethan helped him into the suit properly before carefully handing him an expensive gold wristwatch. James examined it with wide, cautious eyes. Sir, this single watch is probably worth more than my father's entire house. Ethan smiled. Just try very hard not to drop it. James fastened it around his wrist with both trembling hands, treating it like a fragile, ancient artifact. Meanwhile, Ethan changed into James's simple, neatly washed clothing. Ordinary trousers, a plain cotton shirt, comfortable worn shoes. Looking at his own reflection in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back at him. James glanced over and laughed. You actually look like a driver now, sir. Ethan smiled with quiet satisfaction. That's exactly the point. They spent the next hour rehearsing their new roles with growing enthusiasm. Ethan repeatedly walked toward an imaginary car, opened an imaginary back door, and said with practiced politeness, Good evening, sir. James immediately dissolved into laughter. No, you sound far too important for a driver. Ethan laughed too. Then show me how it's really done. James demonstrated the exact greeting he used every single morning, and Ethan mimicked him until James finally nodded with genuine approval. Then it was Ethan's turn to coach James in return. Remember, walk slowly. Never look nervous. Billionaires never rush anywhere. James attempted to cross the room with confident, measured steps, but halfway across, he tripped over the edge of a thick carpet. Both men erupted into uncontrollable laughter. If you walk like that at the party, Ethan joked, wiping tears from his eyes, everyone in the room will immediately know you stole my clothes. James pointed back at him, still laughing helplessly. And if you keep grinning that hard while opening car doors, they'll know instantly you've never actually driven anyone in your life. For a little while, in the middle of all that laughter, Ethan completely forgot the quiet ache that had originally pushed him toward creating this entire reckless plan. That evening, they drove together toward Chris's sprawling, luxurious mansion. Even from a distance, the property looked magnificent. Luxury cars lined both sides of the long, curving driveway, bright lights blazed from every window, and immaculately dressed security officers welcomed guests warmly at the entrance while photographers captured the arrival of prominent local figures. Celebrities, executives, politicians, and wealthy entrepreneurs filled the grand hall in a swirl of silk, gold, and confident laughter. Ethan parked the gleaming car directly outside the entrance before stepping out first, quickly walking around to respectfully open the rear door. James adjusted his suit jacket, took one long, steadying breath, and stepped out exactly the way Ethan had carefully rehearsed with him. The transformation was instantaneous. Nearly every eye in the courtyard turned toward him at once. A cluster of beautifully dressed women smiled brightly and hurried over almost immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Ethan," one greeted with visible excitement. Another admired his watch aloud. "That watch is absolutely gorgeous." A third laughed softly, leaning in a little too close. "Your suit looks incredible on you." Within moments, several women had surrounded him entirely. One asked eagerly for a selfie. Another politely requested his phone number. A third complimented his shoes with theatrical enthusiasm. One woman even joked, only half teasing, "If you don't mind, I might just follow you home tonight." James smiled awkwardly through it all, remembering Ethan's calm advice not to panic no matter what happened. Standing only a few careful steps away, Ethan quietly watched the entire spectacle unfold while pretending to organize the car keys like a seasoned professional driver. Nobody so much as glanced in his direction. Guests strolled past him entirely, their eyes sliding right over his face as though he were made of glass. One elegantly dressed woman casually extended her arm and placed an empty wine glass directly in front of him without breaking stride. "Driver, please throw this away for me." Ethan accepted the glass politely. "Certainly, ma'am." She walked away without offering so much as a glance of thanks. Ethan stood there holding the empty glass for several long seconds before quietly smiling to himself, though the smile carried no real joy in it. "So this is how invisible poor people feel," he whispered under his breath. It wasn't anger settling in his chest. It was something far heavier, far more unsettling. For the first time in many years, he understood, with painful clarity, exactly what it felt like to be dismissed entirely, simply because people assumed you had nothing worth offering them. Inside the grand hall, Chris welcomed the crowd with a cheerful opening speech before lifting a microphone high. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly an honor to have one of this country's finest businessmen with us tonight. Please help me welcome my dear friend, Ethan." Thunderous applause immediately filled the enormous hall. James froze mid-step, panic flashing briefly across his face. He glanced quickly toward Ethan, who offered him a small, steady, encouraging nod from across the crowded room. Taking a deep breath, James forced his legs to carry him slowly toward the stage, each step feeling heavier and more impossible than the last. As he climbed the small platform, the applause only intensified. Several guests rose to their feet. Others whistled with genuine enthusiasm. Before James could even open his mouth to speak, admiring voices rose from the crowd. What an inspiration. A true self-made billionaire. "We're so proud of you, Ethan." James forced a nervous, trembling smile, gripping the microphone far too tightly. Standing quietly among the crowd in his simple driver's clothing, Ethan watched the entire scene unfold with a growing ache in his chest. Nobody was applauding because they truly knew James. Nobody admired him for his genuine character. They were cheering for a name, a fortune, a reputation, all things they believed were standing directly in front of them on that small stage. Ethan lowered his eyes slowly as a painful, unwelcome realization settled deep into his heart. These very same people, who now celebrated the man standing proudly on stage, had completely overlooked the man standing quietly among them just minutes earlier, not because of who either of them truly was inside, but purely because of what each one was assumed to possess. In that single, quiet moment. Something inside Ethan's heart broke in a way no business failure or financial betrayal had ever managed to break it before. As James stood nervously on stage, trying his very best to convincingly play the role of one of the country's most successful businessmen, Ethan quietly remained among the crowd below, watching guests applaud a man they wrongly believed was wealthy beyond measure. The applause echoed through the grand hall, but Ethan's attention slowly began to drift away from the stage entirely. Glancing down, he noticed one of his shoelaces had come undone. Not wanting to risk tripping in front of so many people, he bent down quickly to retie it. As he straightened back up, his shoulder accidentally collided with the arm of a young woman standing quietly beside him. The delicate crystal wine glass in her hand slipped instantly, and before either of them could react in time, deep red wine splashed violently across the front of her stunning white dress. The music seemed to fade into silence around them. Nearby conversation halted mid-sentence. Heads turned sharply from every direction. Several guests gasped audibly. Ethan's eyes widened in immediate horror. "Oh my goodness, I am so incredibly sorry," he blurted out at once. Without thinking, he reached instinctively into his pocket for a handkerchief and began desperately trying to dab the stain from her dress. The wine only smeared further across the delicate white fabric, spreading like an accusation. "I'm so sorry," he repeated again, his voice thick with genuine panic. "I wasn't watching where I was going. Please forgive me. I'll pay for the dress. I absolutely promise you that." The woman stood perfectly still for a moment, staring down at the crimson stain spreading slowly across her chest. Then, rather than screaming or summoning security as everyone around them clearly expected, she did something entirely unexpected. She started laughing. "You're the very first person tonight who's actually looked me directly in the eye while apologizing," she said, shaking her head with an amused smile. "Everyone else in this room has spent the whole evening staring straight at my chest for entirely different reasons. You're genuinely panicking over my dress." Ethan blinked, thoroughly confused. I completely ruined your dress." "Of course I'm panicking." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with open curiosity. "What's your name?" "Ethan," he answered automatically, then caught himself mid-word. I'm Ethan's driver. My name happens to also be Ethan." Her smile widened even further. "The driver and the billionaire share the exact same name? That's rather unusual, don't you think?" Ethan's heart raced uncomfortably. He had nearly shattered the entire plan in a single careless sentence. "It's a fairly common name," he said quickly, forcing calm into his voice. "Very common, actually." She laughed again, clearly delighted rather than suspicious. "Okay then, Ethan the driver. I'm Mia, and honestly, I don't care in the slightest about this dress. It's just fabric." "Just fabric?" Ethan stared at her, genuinely stunned. "That looks like it costs more than my entire month's salary." She shrugged easily, unbothered. "It's expensive, sure, but it's still just fabric. And right now, watching you panic like this is far more entertaining than watching everyone else in this room pretend to like each other." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out at first. He had met hundreds of women throughout the years. He had dated dozens, seriously. But never once had he encountered anyone who responded to a ruined designer dress with genuine, easy laughter instead of fury. She should have been furious. She should have demanded immediate compensation. Instead, she was making gentle jokes at his expense. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like a gift. "I really am terribly sorry," he said again, feeling suddenly, uncharacteristically awkward. "Stop apologizing," she said warmly. "If you truly want to make it up to me, come find me later tonight." I'd like to know more about a driver who casually uses words like compensation and somehow looks at people as though he's the one doing them a favor. Before Ethan could formulate any kind of response, someone called her name from across the crowded room. She offered him one last easy smile and walked away, leaving him standing there holding a ruined handkerchief and a heart that had suddenly, inexplicably, begun beating far too fast. He had no idea, in that unguarded moment, that a pair of narrowed eyes had been watching the entire exchange from just a few feet away. Eyes belonging to Mia's closest friend, Sarah, who had already begun quietly wondering exactly who this strangely well-spoken driver really was. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Mia for the remainder of the night. Her easy smile, her unexpected laugh, the way she had looked at him, not at his clothing, not at his wallet, but directly and unmistakably into his eyes. When the party finally ended, Ethan drove James back toward the mansion, and the two of them spent the next hour laughing helplessly over everything that had unfolded. "You were genuinely amazing up there," Ethan told him sincerely. "You even managed to walk like a billionaire for a few solid minutes," James laughed. "And you, sir, apparently managed to spill an entire glass of wine on a very beautiful woman." Ethan sighed, though a small smile lingered. "She was different, James. She didn't even get angry about it." James raised an eyebrow with growing interest. "Did you get her name?" "Mia. Her name is Mia." James smiled knowingly, the way an old friend does when he senses something important stirring. "Interesting. What exactly is that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all, sir. I simply find it interesting that the only person you truly noticed all night wasn't wearing designer clothing or discussing your bank balance. She was someone who had no idea who you really were." Ethan sat quietly for a long moment, turning those words over carefully in his mind. He realized, with a growing warmth in his chest, that for the first time in years, a woman had genuinely seen him, truly seen him, without any knowledge of his wealth attached to that recognition. She had seen a clumsy, apologetic driver who had spilled wine on her dress, and she had liked him anyway, entirely on his own merit. The next morning, Ethan couldn't shake the memory of her from his mind. He had no idea how to find her, but he knew exactly one person who might. He called Chris immediately. "Do you know a woman named Mia who attended your party last night?" Tall, beautiful, brown eyes. Chris laughed loudly through the phone. "Already? You only just met the woman last night." "I need to find her, Chris. Please." Chris sighed dramatically, then relented. "She's Mia Dixon, a childhood friend of my wife, actually. She works as a nurse over at the city hospital. And Ethan, be careful with this one. She has a reputation for making even the most powerful men in this city completely lose their minds. Consider yourself thoroughly warned." Ethan didn't care in the slightest. For the first time in years, he wanted, more than anything, to be loved for exactly who he truly was. Not his money, not his power, just himself, stripped of every title. He decided to visit the hospital the very next day. He dressed in old, comfortable jeans and a simple shirt, climbed into his oldest and least impressive car, and drove straight toward the city hospital. He had no idea that, at that very same moment, Sarah was sitting across from Mia in her small apartment kitchen, voicing exactly the doubts that would soon threaten to unravel everything. "Something about that driver doesn't add up," Sarah said flatly, stirring her tea with more force than necessary. She had spent the entire morning turning the party over in her mind, and the pieces refused to settle comfortably into place. Mia glanced up from her phone, amused. "You've said that 4 times already this morning." "Because it's true 4 times over," Sarah insisted, leaning forward. "Mia, think about it properly. A driver doesn't apologize using the word compensation. A driver doesn't stand with that kind of posture. Shoulders back, chin level, like he owns whatever room he's standing in. And that name coincidence? Ethan the driver, working for Ethan the billionaire? That's not a coincidence. That's a cover story." Mia rolled her eyes, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face before she quickly masked it. "You're being paranoid." "I'm being careful," Sarah corrected sharply. "Do you have any idea how many wealthy men run exactly this kind of test on women? They pretend to be poor, watch how you treat them, and if you fail some invisible test, they vanish without a word. If you pass, they reveal themselves like some kind of hero in a movie. It's manipulative, Mia. It's a game, and you're the unwitting contestant." Mia's smile faltered slightly, doubt creeping visibly into her expression for the first time. "You think he's actually Ethan? The real one?" "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that you should be very cautious before you let yourself fall for a man who might have been lying to you from the very first sentence he spoke." The words settled heavily in Mia's chest, planting a small, persistent seed of doubt that would follow her for days. One that would resurface at exactly the worst possible moment. When Ethan arrived at the hospital, he spotted Mia speaking gently with an elderly patient. her face soft and full of genuine tenderness. She asked carefully about his pain levels, adjusted his pillow with practiced care, and touched his arm with quiet affection. Ethan watched her from a respectful distance, quietly amazed by her warmth. But as he finally approached, he noticed her expression shift. Not cold exactly, but noticeably more guarded than the easy laughter he remembered from the party. "Ethan the driver," she said, though her smile carried a new, careful edge to it. "I didn't think I'd actually see you again. I couldn't stop thinking about you," he admitted honestly. "I know that probably sounds a little crazy." She studied him for a long moment before answering. "It's not crazy. It's honest, at least. I like honesty." A pause. "Do you have any of that to offer me today?" Something in her tone made Ethan's stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" Mia crossed her arms, her eyes searching his face carefully. "A friend of mine thinks you might not actually be who you claim to be. She thinks Ethan the driver might just be a costume Ethan the billionaire is wearing to test people like some kind of game." Ethan's heart dropped. This was the exact moment he had feared and hoped for in equal measure. The moment the truth would surface, one way or another. He could lie again. He could deflect, buy himself more time, protect the plan a little longer. Instead, he took a slow breath and told the truth. "Your friend is right," he said quietly. "My name is Ethan Thompson. I am the businessman from the magazines. James, the man who stood on that stage, is actually my driver. My closest friend, really. I asked him to switch places with me for one night because I wanted, just once, to know what it felt like to be seen without my money attached to me." Mia's face remained carefully unreadable for a long, tense moment. "So you lied to me. From the very first sentence you ever said to me?" "Yes," Ethan admitted, refusing to soften it. "I did. And I'm sorry for that. But everything else, every word, every reaction, everything you saw in me that night, none of that was a lie. That panic over your dress was real. That fascination with the way you laughed instead of getting angry was real. I've spent years being loved for my bank account, Mia. I just wanted, for one single evening, to know if anyone could ever look at me and see something more than that." Mia was silent for a long, aching moment, clearly wrestling with something deep inside herself. Then, slowly, something in her expression softened. "You could have told me sooner." "I know," Ethan said. "I was afraid. Afraid that the moment you learned the truth, I'd become just another wallet to you, exactly like everyone before you." Mia studied him carefully, weighing his words against everything she'd witnessed with her own eyes. "And now that I know the truth, what happens next?" Ethan managed a small, hopeful smile. "Now, I suppose, we start over. No more disguises, no more testing. Just honesty, if you're willing to give me that chance." Mia considered this for a long moment before a small, genuine smile finally broke through her guarded expression. "Honesty," she repeated. "I think I'd like that very much." Over the following weeks, Ethan and Mia began building something entirely different from anything either of them had known before. Something built deliberately on complete honesty rather than performance. He told her everything now, without hesitation. About his mother roasting corn by the roadside. About the promise he'd made at her graveside. About every painful rejection, every stolen contract, every sleepless night spent rebuilding from nothing. Mia listened to every word with the same tender attention she gave her patients, asking thoughtful questions, never once mentioning his wealth unless he brought it up himself. In turn, she told him about her own dreams. The small bakery she hoped to open someday, filled with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of easy laughter. She told him about her parents, about the values of kindness and humility they had instilled in her since childhood. She told him about Sarah's protective suspicion, and together they laughed about how close that suspicion had come to unraveling everything before it had even properly begun. Sarah herself remained cautious for a while longer, watching carefully from the sidelines to see whether Ethan's honesty would hold steady now that the disguise had fallen away entirely. It was only after weeks of watching him show up consistently, bringing Mia lunch during long hospital shifts, remembering the smallest details of her stories, never once trying to buy his way into her affection, that Sarah finally, reluctantly, admitted she might have been wrong about him. I still think you should watch him carefully, she told Mia one evening, only half joking now. But I suppose he's not entirely terrible. Mia laughed. That might be the closest thing to approval I've ever heard from you. Later, Ethan and Mia sat together quietly in the hospital garden, the evening light settling gently around them. How did you really know? Ethan asked her softly. That night, before Sarah even said anything, how did you already sense something wasn't quite right? Mia smiled and tilted her face up toward the darkening sky. You looked at me, she said simply. Not through me, not past me toward whatever came next, but directly at me. People who have everything sometimes forget how to truly look at people at all. They look at clothes, at titles, at status. You looked at me. Ethan smiled, reaching gently for her hand. I want to introduce you to my mother's grave sometime soon. I think she would have loved you very much. Mia squeezed his hand warmly. I would like that more than you know. Every story carries a lesson worth remembering. Ethan had spent years quietly building an empire of wealth, but somewhere along that long, difficult climb, he had forgotten that true connection is never built on bank balances or grand titles. It is built patiently on honesty, on humility, and on the simple, rare willingness to see other people for exactly who they truly are. In his desperate quest to finally be loved, he had very nearly missed the one person capable of loving him without a single condition attached. Now, at last, he had found her. Not through money, and not through power, but through vulnerability, through the simple, terrifying act of being entirely himself. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan felt truly, completely free. For the first time, he was loved not for what he possessed, but for exactly who he was underneath it all. And that, he finally understood, was the greatest success he would ever achieve. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Afrok-Drama Diaries for more stories that will make you think, feel, and remember what truly matters. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell us in the comments, have you ever met someone who loved you for who you truly are? We read every single comment. Every story has a lesson. See you in the next one.